In this lesson, we're going to discuss the steps you need to know to use the Puppet tool for animation. Okay, so the object that I'm going to want to use my Puppet tool on is going to be a graphic I have here in my graphics folder, and that is the personicon.ai file. Now, whenever I use my Puppet tool for animation, I always like to start that in its own comp because it saves me time and headaches later on. So let's go ahead and grab the person icon and drag that onto the Create a New Composition button. That's going to open that in a new comp for us, and I want to go ahead and come in here and adjust my composition settings. So come up here, go to composition settings, and I'm going to go ahead and turn this up to 1280 by 720. Just so that we can tell what size we want that composition to be and be able to see how that's going to interact with our main composition when we bring this in later. And for the most part, the rest of these settings look good. I have this at 10 seconds here. We can just round that right off to an even 10 seconds. And you want your frame rate to be 24 frames per second as well. Okay, so I'll go ahead and hit OK now. And I also want to scale him up just so that I can see him a little bit better, and be careful not to scale him up too far past the bounds of the composition, because once we start pinning the guy with our Puppet tool, it's going to be really difficult to change the scale at that point without causing some strange errors. So go ahead and get that guy to the scale that you want. I'm just going to pull it up so that the top of his head is touching the top line of that title action safe and his feet are at the bottom of it. And then I'm going to go ahead and also turn on the continuously rasterize switch so that he comes back into focus and we don't see any kind of aliasing there along the edge. And now we're ready to use our Puppet tool. So the Puppet tool is located right up here at the end of the toolbar. So this is the Puppet Pin tool. You're going to go ahead and click that, and then we want to pin our puppet in a way that we would be pinning where a joint would be on a normal human, since we have kind of a human object here. So I'm going to pin him right there at the tip of his head, just kind of like at the base right there, and then we'll do another one right there where the head would connect if he had a neck. And then I'm going to come in here and pin right at the shoulder, elbow, and hand. And then again, just mirroring that on the other side. And then we'll do the same thing for the legs, just where the hip, knee, and foot would be. And do that on the other side. Okay, so now we've created several pins on this character, and it's important that you just pin them in a way where any place that you would have a joint moving, you'll have just the most range of motion if you just go ahead and put a pin there, even if you don't end up animating that point later on. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and drag this up so you can see the timeline a little bit better. And with this layer selected, we can go ahead and hit the U key just to bring up the keyframes. Now, you may think that you didn't set any keyframes yet, but the way that the Puppet tool works is that each pin that you sets a keyframe on your timeline. So that's what you're seeing here all along this first frame. So what it's basically saying is at this point in time, I want all of my characters' motions and movements just to kind of be in this standing pose. So now let's go ahead and scrub forward just a little bit. I'm just kind of up here at about 12 frames, 12 or 13 frames in. And now I want to grab those points and move him so we can create a small animation. So come up there and grab your selection tool. And if you want to get back to those puppet pins, because now that we don't have this selected anymore, you can see that we're not able to see those pins. You can just click on any of these keyframes and it's going to bring those pins back onto your object. So now let's just go ahead and kind of start moving him around. I'm going to move the arm up just a little bit, and I want to create a look almost kind of like he's floating in the air. So later when we bring him into the main composition, you'll kind of be able to see how that fits this idea. So I'm just going to move this other arm over here so his arm looks like it's a little bit bent. And we could even maybe move the head just a little bit if we want to. Okay, so now if we scrub this, we see that we've created this small animation. And I also want to move on past these keyframes, and then have him go back into that first pose that we created. And instead of coming in here and trying to reposition all of these pins, I'm just going to copy and paste the pins from the first set of keys. So just go ahead and drag a box around all of those pins or keys and select those, and then we'll hit Control-C to copy them and Control-V to paste them to our current time indicators spot on the timeline. And now if we scrub, you can see the animation that we've created where he moves into that pose and then comes back into the plain standing pose. Okay, so that seems pretty simple. It's pretty easy to get that to work. But now, what if we want to add some other kind of motion like scaling, or really in the next scene, I would like to drop him in where those videos were in our last composition. So let's go ahead and try to create an animation like that. Go ahead and just select the layer and we'll hit the P key to bring up our position property. And I'll set a keyframe just right there at about 1 second because this is where I want him to animate to. And then here at the beginning, I'm going to just push him out of the comp so that he can drop in. And if I scrub this, you'll notice we get a really strange result. So basically what's happening is those pins that we created are expecting the object to stay in one place, and they don't play very nicely with having any other kind of keyframes that move the object away from where those pins were originally set. So that is why I had you create this in a separate composition. So now any kind of transformations that we want to add on top of this, we can do to the composition on the outside. So let's go ahead and do that now. I'm just going to delete that first position key and then the second one as well, because this is where I want my person to end up. And let's go back out to our main composition. So now we can go back over to our compositions here in the project panel. It looks like this composition that we created was added inside the graphics folder. So let's get a little bit better organized and just drag that up to the top and drop it in our compositions folder. And now we can take it out of there and drag it on to our main comp. I'm just going to drag this over. So probably right around the time that the videos begin to exit is where I want to create this animation for my person. So I'm going to have that start just right about there. So that's kind of intersecting with those keys. And then right about here is where I want the person to land. So we'll go ahead and set a position key on our person icon comp right there. Now, one of the things that we may notice at this point is that my 3D switch has not been turned on. So you're going to want to turn that on now so that your camera can recognize this if we do another move while the man is in our viewer. So go ahead and hit that, and you'll notice that that makes him disappear. And that's just because it sent him back to that 0 point here in space. So you can just grab that and bring it back up right there. And now it's going to be really easy for us to add any kind of scale transformation simply because we scaled him up inside of our other comp. Now it's important to notice that we're not turning on collapse transformations for this. And I'm going to go ahead and switch it on now just so you can see what happens. He disappears. And if I went in and grabbed him and brought him back into this area, the puppet tool would no longer be working. So collapse transformations does not play nicely with the puppet tool. So you want to make sure that whatever objects you put inside of your composition have been scaled up before you ever brought those pins onto the object, and that's going to make a big difference for if you're able to use this with 3D layers. So let's go ahead and set our position keys, and then there at the beginning of that comp, I'm just going to push our object up out of the top of our main composition. And now if we scrub that, we see we don't get that strange result anymore where he has those lines and outlines going through him. And if you want to, you can even maybe come in here and go back to your composition and now time it a little bit better that you can see the timing on the outside. So let's bring up those keyframes again. I'm just going to hit the U key. And it looks like they're just moving a little bit slowly. So I'm going to bring those keys back so they just happen over less time. And this will be a good time to show you an easy way to do that. Instead of coming in here and having to select each row of keyframes at a time and bringing them back, I can simply select all of my keys, hold the Alt key, and then select any of the keys here on the far right and drag them towards that current time indicator, and that's going to squeeze those keys into that time, but keep the space in between the keys proportionate. So that's a really helpful trick. That's just holding the Alt key and dragging those keys. Okay, let's go back out to our main composition and do a quick RAM preview just to see what we've created. So I'm going to clip that work area just to this spot right here and hit that 0 key on the number pad to watch it back. So our videos move out and our person drops in. So that looks really good, and we're not getting any of those strange lines. Now, one last thing that I want to do is just to change the fill of this little person we have here. We can change that here in our comp, or we can go inside of the person icon and change it there. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm just going to double click that, and we'll go ahead and add the effect generate fill effect. So come up there and click effect generate fill. And then let's grab the swatches from our project panel, bring that onto our comp, and let's just color pick this blue color we have there. So I'm going to come back over to the effect controls, and we'll use the eyedropper just to pick that. Now you can turn off those swatches, and you'll notice that that didn't affect the puppet tool at all. We only just changed the color of that outline. And now he's just going to be a lot more contrasty with our background, so that just looks a little bit better. Okay, so in this lesson, we learned how to get started using the puppet tool. And we also learned how to fix the common problem that happens when you try to move a layer that has puppet tool data.